do you think crypto can have a role in improving financial infrastructure?
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of things that um, that PayPal has that allow us to look at this maybe in a slightly different way than, one form or another, or one camp or another. First of all, we have tremendous scale, and we have that scale around the globe. So we understand um, government and central bank and regulators' points of view across the world. To really be a financial services player, sort of the foundation of that is compliance, is regulatory compliance. It's understanding FinCEN rules and understanding how to work hand in hand with governments to advance their agendas, as well as those of central banks as well. And so to me, that's just foundational. But here's the interesting thing. When I think about the financial system today, I think about it, and you just mentioned a couple of these things. One, it's relatively inefficient in terms of it can take days to clear transactions, to really get money into your account. The take rate of the financial system across the world right now is about 2.8%. And it's been relatively constant for 10 years, which, by the way, doesn't really make sense because most of the time, technological advances as well as scale drive down costs. But the most disappointing part of that 2.8% is if you're more affluent, that take rate can be 1% or less. But if you have less money, then that take rate can be 5, maybe even 10%. And so the system it's slow. It excludes a lot of people, and it's not inclusive. So people can be left behind. And I think governments, central banks are all trying to figure out what is the next generation of technology that can address some of those issues, that can make the system faster, less costly, and more inclusive. And I do think that some of the underlying technologies associated with cryptocurrencies, potentially some of the underlying technologies that central banks are looking at, do have that benefit of really taking the infrastructure of the old system and modernizing it so that we can achieve a much more inclusive society. And that's a goal of everybody.
Turning specifically to PayPal, sounds like you're standing up a crypto unit. Can you shed a little light on what exactly that means? Who's running that? What is their mission? What do you hope that's going to yield next year and then 5 years from now?
Yeah, we've been studying sort of the next generation of payments for the last 5 years or so. We were fortunate enough to have Wences Casares on our board for a while. If you know Wences, he's sort of ground zero for Bitcoin in Silicon Valley. He encouraged us to look at all forms of different structures that might emerge. We had a blockchain research unit inside our tech teams. We've done investments over the last 5 years. But as I really saw this massive shift towards digital in the last year, the rapid decline of the use of cash, more and more people wanting to do digital transactions, both online and offline, I really felt we needed to take all of our resources across PayPal and really recruit heavily from the outside to get the best talent inside PayPal, because we have 377 million digital wallets right now. They're a natural complement to all forms of digital currency. Our mission is to try to be very inclusive, make sure nobody's left behind as we move into the digital economy. I'm thinking about the modernization of the underlying infrastructure and what kind of role can we play in that, in helping potentially to shape that, working hand in hand with regulators and central banks. I felt like we really needed a business unit that was exclusively focused on that, that had all the resources that it needed and all the talent that it needed to be able to advance that agenda.
Can I push you for a couple more specifics? So you mentioned Wences Casares, who is indeed a legend in crypto circles. Is he going to have a hands-on role, or any other specifics you can share about what the mission is for this unit?
Yeah. Well, it is to advance the utility of digital currencies. And what I mean by that is both cryptocurrencies, because we didn't move into the crypto environment because we felt like Bitcoin was going to move from 10,000 to 30,000 or 30,000 to 50,000. That's not what our underlying goal is, to ride that asset class, up or down in terms of trading. It's really to take what are the fundamental benefits of cryptocurrencies and digital currencies, and how do they take payments to a next generation. As I mentioned, the modern infrastructure is out, the infrastructure today is outdated. There's a whole modern infrastructure that we can use right now, whether that be smart contracts, whether that be digitizing assets and democratizing access to those, whether that means the ability for people in developing countries to be part of the digital economy. I think there is a ton of opportunity for us to be helpful in creating that next generation infrastructure. That's what this business unit is about. We've put some of our very best technologists in it. We've taken those from our core tech team into this digital blockchain and digital currency business unit. We're recruiting from the outside. We're setting up an advisory board where you'll have both tech experts, regulatory experts, some crypto experts in that. We'll announce that over the next couple of months. And we'll look to potentially acquire as well, whether that be acquiring talent or capabilities to help us to work with regulators and governments and consumers to really put the promise of what's been talked about into play, real functionality into the market, not just think about crypto as an asset class, but really as a fundamental underlying part of how we can advance payments.
And will part of the process involve embracing Ethereum or another platform in addition to Bitcoin?
It very well could. Right now we accept, for trading purposes, Ethereum, Litecoin, Bitcoin Cash, and Bitcoin. That'll expand going forward, but that's only, buy, sell, hold. When you look at the underlying technology, you want to make sure that it can be built for scale, that the transaction speed can handle, thousands of transactions a second. And so I think we need to look at any of the various underlying technologies. There are different chains that you could look at that have different capabilities, some with smart contracts, some, fit for payments, and then see, do some of these things evolve going forward? You're seeing an evolution of the underlying technology associated with Bitcoin. And so I think, we'll bring together our point of view. We'll work across the ecosystem and see if there are ways of possibly converging in some way some of these underlying technologies. And if not, take the best of each of them and enable our consumers, depending on what they want to use, to be able to use any underlying payment technology or infrastructure to advance whatever their payment may be.
Will PayPal join Square and other companies in adding Bitcoin to its balance sheet?
You know, we're still looking at that. It's not necessarily, high on our radar screen. We want to utilize our cash balances and our capital allocation in thoughtful ways. One, a lot of our capital allocation, is governed by regulatory bodies, like where can we have that invested? Number two, we don't necessarily like the ups and downs of what can happen if you invest in a certain asset class. And we want to use that for potential, acquisitions and have that readily available to us. So that's not necessarily high on our radar screen. That doesn't mean that we don't believe in the underlying value of Bitcoin or others. In fact, really, Jeff, if you think about it, what we're trying to do is create utility, real utility, over and above it being an asset class. How do we have cryptocurrencies being a funding instrument in our wallets? And that's just like step one for increasing functionality. And that to me is the real value add that PayPal can add to our consumers and to the digital currency community at large.
Finally, what's one thing the US government could do to facilitate the sort of transformations you're discussing?
Well, I think the government is looking carefully at modernizing the underlying infrastructure. And I think all governments and regulators need to be careful and considered. And that's what I think, our government is doing inside the US. And they need to balance kind of innovation with financial stability, and other monetary goals that they have. And so I think embracing, what could be, not being wed to necessarily what is, but kind of imagining kind of if we move into these new technologies, if we move into more central bank digital currencies, what could that unleash? Like, what good things could that unleash? And then what regulatory guardrails do we have to make sure that, we don't let bad guys into the system, that we protect consumers? That's all in line with the way that we're thinking as well. And so just an open mind, consideration of what could be, working hand in hand with the public and private sector together, I think that could be very powerful.